Hello everyone and welcome to 7th grade Math Module 3, Expressions and Equations. In this video we're looking at lessons 16 and 17, the most famous ratio of all. Our learning goal is to use formulas to calculate the measurements of different parts of a circle. This will help us to master Standard 7GB4. Know the formulas for the area and circumference of a circle and use them to solve problems. Before we get started, let's review some important terms about circles. First is circumference, which is the distance around the outside of a circle. We find the circumference by doing 2 times pi times the radius, or the diameter times pi. The diameter is a line segment from the outside of a circle to its center and out to the other side again. To find a diameter, you can take 2 times the radius of a circle. A radius is a line segment from the outside of a circle to its center, and a radius is half the length of a diameter. Area is the space inside of a circle measured in square units. We find it by doing pi times our radius squared. And the last thing, that most famous ratio of all, pi, is the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. Pi is an irrational number. It never repeats or terminates, and because it goes on forever, we usually round it to 3.14, or sometimes to the fraction 22/7. There is a pi button on most calculators, and sometimes you will be required to calculate pi using that button. Let's start by calculating circumference of some circles using our equations, either 2 times pi times our radius, or diameter times pi. In our first circle, we see that we have a radius of 12 feet. Since we have a radius, we can use the 2 pi r equation. So all we need to do is replace the letter r with the value of the radius, which is 12, and we can solve. There are 3 different ways we could write answers with most of our problems involving circles, and usually your problem will specify which one you should do. One of those is in terms of pi. If your answer is supposed to be written in terms of pi, you multiply all of the numbers in your problem, and you leave pi alone as if it were a variable. And you write down what you got when you multiplied your numbers like a coefficient. So I could do 2 times 12 is 24, and leave it next to pi to show that it still needs to be multiplied by pi. That is our answer in terms of pi. You could also be asked to calculate the circumference using the pi button. When you do that, you will get a decimal that goes on forever. So you can use that squiggly looking equal sign to show that you are estimating your answer. And in this case, we would get about 75 4/10 feet. If instead we used 3.14, the rounded value of pi, we would get 75 36/100 feet. As you see, those two answers are very close, but they are different since one of those used a rounded version of pi before we calculated. Let's try this again with a different circle. This circle has a diameter of 8. You can pause the video here to try using one of the formulas to calculate for your circumference. Because we have a diameter, it's easiest to use the formula diameter times pi, although we could have used 2 times radius times pi. All we need to do with the diameter formula, though, is plug in 8 for diameter. Once we do that, we already have our answer in terms of pi of 8 pi meters. There was nothing left to multiply together. If we use our pi button on our calculator, we get 25 13/100 meters. And if we rounded with 3.14 for pi instead, we get 25 12/100 meters. Next, let's try to calculate some areas of circles. We use the formula area equals pi times radius squared. In order to find our area, all we need to do is replace the r in our equation with the value of the radius. So, in our first circle that has a radius of 12 yards, all we need to do is take the radius of 12 and square it, or multiply it by itself, to get 144 times pi. That will be our answer in terms of pi. If we needed to calculate more specifically with our pi button, we would get 452 4/10 yards squared, or if we rounded pi to 3.14, we would get 452 16/100 yards squared. You can pause the video now to try to calculate the area of the circle on the right. Keep in mind the circle on the right has a diameter, not a radius, and you need to find your radius in order to find area. because a radius is half of a diameter, we can take our diameter of 9 and 8/10 and divide it by 2 to get 4 and 9/10. Then we just need to square that number and multiply it by pi. When we square 4 and 9/10, we get 24 and 1/100th. So our answer in terms of pi is 24 and 1/100th times pi. If we multiply using the pi button on our calculator, that comes out to 75 and 43/100ths if we round it to the nearest hundredth. Or if instead we rounded pi to 3 and 14/100ths, we would have gotten 75.3914, 3,914 10,000ths. All of those problems were pretty straightforward. But what happens if we need to go backwards? What if instead we are given a circumference or area and need to find something like a radius? Well, we can use what we know about equations from earlier in this module and the equations for those things to try to find our missing variable. So for example, if I have a circumference of 62 and 8/10 miles, first I would write down my equation for circumference. Then I would replace any variables whose value I know. In this case, c would be replaced with 62 and 8/10. Now I can follow those same 5 steps we've been following since the beginning of the module to solve our equations. So I would first combine my like terms by doing 2 times pi. I rounded my answer to the nearest tenth, and I got 6 and 3/10 r. Next, you could divide both sides by 6 and 3/10 to find that r equals 10 if we round it to the nearest tenth. So if we used different values or rounded to different areas, we might have ended up with slightly different answers, but they all should have been close to 10. Now you can pause the video and try to find the radius if you know that your area is 25 times pi. Note that that area is in terms of pi already. Your first step should have been replacing the a in our area formula with the value of our area, which is 25 times pi. Next, we want to get our variable of r by itself. So we can divide both sides of our equation by the thing being multiplied by our variable, which is pi. When we do that, we're just left with 25 equals r squared. Now in 7th grade, you guys are only expected to find the square root, or the number that was being squared, of our perfect squares. Those are numbers that you get when you multiply a number by itself and can easily be found on a multiplication chart. So using what we know about our facts, we know that 5 times 5 is 25. So if r squared is 25, then r would be 5. What does this make you wonder about solving for the area or circumference of a circle, or its missing radii or diameter? You can write your questions at the bottom of your notes and ask a classmate or teacher for help, or look online. Thanks for watching, and when you're trying this on your own, remember, if you learn from your failures, then you succeeded.